to say that you're still under oath. Before the lunch break, we were talking about this charge of murder that was proffered against you, together with almost 100 other UDP supporters. What happened to that charge? Can you take us through the progression of that case until the prosecutions were terminated?
Well, the original charge was subsequently amended, and another information was filed. In fact, the charge from the magistrate court was never dealt with by the High Court. It was only dealt with, or the issues in the magistrate court were only dealt with by the High Court in terms of the bail procedures. And as I said, the state did file applications to rescind the bail, which was unsuccessful. Subsequent to all that, the Attorney General filed an information in the High Court against 5 of us.
Only 5?
Only 5 of us.
So the charges were dropped against the 90 odd
yes, that's right. That's
members of the UDP?
That is right. That is right.
And which 5 individuals?
Those were myself, Mamalam Singul Nyasi, Lam Marong, Rawan Sek. I can't remember the 5th one. Anyway, these were 4 people that I vividly remember. Rawan Sek was my bodyguard. He was a Senegalese national. Yes.
And do you recall which year that occurred?
That was in 2000.
In 2000?
In 2000.
All right.
Yes.
And did the proceedings continue after the amendment of the charge, dropping all other accused persons except the 5 of you?
Yes, the proceedings, the trials proceeded with, in fact, the trials proceeded, and a matter came up on the Court of Appeal as to whether, in fact, the pleas were taken, properly taken, and it turned out that no pleas were taken. So that led to our rearrest by the police. In fact, myself, Yaya Jallo, Singul Nyasi, and Brawanati, we were arrested and taken to various different police stations. I was taken to Yundum police station, Yaya Jallo to Bundung, and I believe Singul Nyasi was taken to Bakau. Yeah? We are separated. And
do you know why you were separated?
So that we do not communicate. Yeah, I believe so that we do not communicate, and also probably to make things also difficult for our lawyers because they would have to hop from one police station to another. Yes.
Right.
And of course, with that arrest, our lawyers put in an application in the High Court to make sure that the previous order made remain intact.
Previous bail order
made.
Because it is still the same case.
It's in the same case. Remain intact, and the High Court so ruled, and it took time even, with that ruling, it even took time before he could be released. In fact, I had threatened that I was going to walk out of the police station if the police officer did not do what was required of him, because he was waiting for instructions from his superiors. I felt sorry for the poor chap when he knew what was being done was wrong, but he didn't also want to offend his superiors. Yeah. But then after, I think I spent about 7 days at Yundum police station before I finally got home. It was in fact during the month of Ramadan.
And during that 7-day period, did they take you before a court?
No, in fact, we are taking the issues before the court.
And they offered no explanation for why you had to be kept?
No explanation.
So, how did the proceedings unfold after your release?
After our release, we made a few appearances before Justice Hikere, and then, in fact, the case file got assigned from one High Court judge to another until it finally came before Justice Tahir. Yeah? The trial was concluded by Justice Tahir, although it had previously been handled by another judge, but then Justice Tahir completed the trial.
Did the prosecution, obviously a trial is completed, so I would imagine the prosecution must have called witnesses.
Well, the prosecution called all their witnesses, closed their case, and my legal team, led by Mr. Antman Gay, then made a no-case submission, which was upheld.
So the prosecution lost woefully?
The prosecution's case lacked absolute merit. There was nothing in their case. It was just harassment by using the legal process.
Do you know for certain whether in fact somebody did die as a result of which you were charged?
Well, I do not know, but I was told that somebody died. But I do not know, because I know, as a matter of practice, even when I was a prosecutor, when someone is accused of committing murder, the victim, he is taken to the mortuary and shown the victim. That here is the person.
At least in domestic jurisdictions, there has to be a body.
Yeah, that here is the deceased, of whose murder you have been investigated. Nothing of that sort happened.
If you could recall, was an autopsy report provided in the information?
There was an autopsy report.
What did they say was the cause of death or manner of death?
Well, the autopsy report concluded that he must have died from shock and had injuries, deep lacerations, you know. So, and he must have died from an excessive loss of blood.
But during your campaign, were members of your team armed with any weapons?
We never go armed in the public. In fact, this incident, we subsequently discovered that the APRC July 22nd movement chaps had gone out with instruments that should be used in burying people. There were pickaxes, shovels, axes, and cutlasses in their vehicles. In fact, one of the vehicles was burnt. One of the vehicles was burnt, and that vehicle, I want to believe that was burnt by our people. By UDP.
By UDP.
That's why, yes. And in other vehicles, we have found machetes, cutlasses, and pickaxes. And I think my conclusion was that if any of us was killed there, then they would just have, dug some hole and dump us in there and go away.
But with regards to the conduct of your own people, burning the vehicle of another political party is wrong, isn't it?
Well, it is wrong, but it was not burning the vehicle of another political party. It was burning the vehicle of the government of the Gambia that was being used by another political party in contravention of what should happen. I admit that that was wrong. The government of the Gambia should never have allowed that. In fact, whilst we were on that scene, we saw vehicles marked UN. That was, in fact, a vehicle that was being used at the refugee camp. Was also being used by these people. We saw that.
Both acts were wrong.
Absolutely. Absolutely. There's absolutely no doubt about that.
And also the act of the UDP supporters in burning that vehicle was wrong and deserved condemnation.
Absolutely.
Did you take any steps to get your people to appreciate that use of force against a political opponent was absolutely wrong?
I have always been advocate of abiding by the law. At all my rallies, at the end of my rallies, what I advise my people to do is to conform with the accepted standards. No one should do anything that contravenes the law.
But beyond the mere rhetoric, did you take any steps to punish those who participated in that unlawful act?
In fact, the point is that I did not know who, in fact, did it, because nobody would say that I did it. So I could not really reprimand any particular individual. So whatever has to be done has to be very general.
Did you deem it fit to conduct an investigation?
I definitely did definitely did make inquiries, find out.
But don't you think, sir, that this is a case in which a thorough investigation should have been conducted? Because one, if we question conduct of an opposing side and request that they should conduct investigations into their own ills, the same should apply to your side.
But yeah, the same should apply to my side, and all that I could do is to ask who were responsible for this, and I could not get any answer. It was my own conclusion that this, because that was a vehicle belonging to the government of the Gambia, being used by people I call hooligans, being used by them. So my conclusion was that it would be members of my team that would have burned the vehicle. And for the investigation, I would have expected that the Inspector General of Police would have, in fact, included that in his investigations.
But
when he was investigating the issue of murder, that should have been included in his investigations, but they are not concerned about that. What concerned them more was how do we get Mr. Dabo behind the bar?
I agree with that fully, that side ought to have investigated everything that happened. But equally, for your side, in order to ensure that your side is on the side of the law, in order to ensure that the conduct of your own people is beyond reproach, an investigation should have been launched by your party to ensure that you get to the bottom of it in order to punish those people who may have fallen afoul of the law.
And indeed, as I said, I conducted an inquiry and I couldn't pinpoint it to any particular individual, and that led me to make that general statement. If I had zeroed it to a particular individual, then appropriate measures would have been taken by the party in disciplining the person. And of course, the commission of the crime, if it was crime, would be a matter for the state to pursue. I had only, if there's anything, we had only a moral obligation. We had no legal obligation, and I would have expected the state to conduct the investigations as to how that vehicle got burned. And it was indeed not in their interest, because they knew that government resources, government materials should not be used by the APRC in the commission of crimes against the UDP. This was an instrument of crime. The vehicle was an instrument of crime being used by the APRC when they were ambushing us. So that instrument of crime, really, I don't know what the lawyers will say. In my view, when you destroy instrument of crime, there should certainly be there should certainly be no complaint about that.
I beg to differ, sir.
That's right.
I mean, this is a property belonging to Gambia government. Whether it was improperly used by the Gambia government or not should not be reason why it should be burned, for instance. There is no reason.
I believe the Gambia government ought to have foreseen that in the manner I'm using this particular article, certain consequences can follow. You use a vehicle in ambushing an entourage of not less than 100 people. Whatever instrument you use in doing that, you should foresee that such an instrument could be subject to damage. You should foresee that.
So essentially you're saying it was justified?
I'm not saying that it's justified, because I do not condone, or that if it was justified, I wouldn't have made a general statement to people to abide by the law.
It has to be one or the other. It's either justified or unlawful.
We are not saying that. We are not saying that it is lawful, but we are saying that certainly no government has any right to use government material in the commission of a crime. And if the victims of the crime can in any way, do anything that would prevent use of that instrument or that particular article in the further commission of the crime, I think they have every right to stop it.
Yes, but the two wrongs do not make a right. The government conduct was wrong, it was unlawful. The conduct of your supporters was also wrong and unlawful.
It was not a question of who is right and who is wrong in this particular. It is a question of who engineered the whole incident. Who engineered the whole incident. That is where the judgment ought to lie, or any conclusion, any reasonable conclusion ought to lie.
Well, I want to take it a little further than that. I want to also have us examine the conduct of all sides, of both sides for this matter, because the interest of the Gambian people is there should be decorum and lawful conduct on all sides of the political spectrum. So the fact that Party A has done wrong or acted unlawfully is no basis for Party B to also respond unlawfully.
In the context of the TRRC, that will be a wrong conclusion.
Why?
See, it is the persistent and consistent violations by the other party. What allegations have been made against the opposition parties here? What allegations have been made against opposition parties here in violating rights of APRC supporters? No such allegation. So in the context of this TRRC, that would be a wrong conclusion. You have to have a pattern by the opposition that will really make them culpable. But there is no such pattern by UDP. No. When in fact you have the pattern by APRC.
The pattern of mistreatment of opposition supporters by supporters of the APRC or by the APRC itself is central to these investigations, and all that would be taken into account. But equally, an unlawful response by members of any opposition party or of any group should equally be of concern. It does not necessarily have to be a persistent conduct. All it has to be is that this is an unlawful act or a violation of another person's right. And then it becomes a matter of concern for the country and for the TRRC. So, and I am suggesting to you, sir, that the UDP supporters acted unlawfully, and that itself is of concern and should be noted, just like you were so concerned as to inquire from your people who did it and why.
Yes, I agree that this should be a matter that could be of concern, but then the scales are too different.
Agreed, the scales are different.
The scales are so diametrical, they are so different that they are not comparable, because such an isolated incident would not have caused a TRRC to be instituted in this country. Obviously. Such an isolated incident would only have caused the government then to conduct a criminal investigation into the matter, bring the culprits before court to trial. But what I'm saying, and I assume that was my supporters, but what I'm saying that if the government had any reason to believe that, as I did, to believe that UDP did it, then they should have done the investigation. In fact, it should be part of their investigation. It should, in fact, be part of the indictment that was filed against me and my other supporters.
I think we can agree that the conduct of the AFPRC in this regard was wrong and unlawful. Equally, the response by the UDP, whether it was isolated or not, was also wrong and also should be deplored, just like we deplore the AFPRC Act or the APRC Act. What I am saying is there should not be any room for violence in the political field.
Absolutely. Violence in the political field should be rejected by anybody. And also, no one should promote that.
And the political leaders also have a responsibility to ensure that their supporters do not participate in violence against opposition.
Absolutely. Otherwise, we'll be failing our leadership.
And that is precisely the point, sir, why I said the conduct of the UDP supporters ought to have been investigated and steps taken to ensure that such reaction or response does not happen again.
Well, investigation in the context in which you are using it, I don't think we can do that. I made inquiries, and that is what I can do. I am not an investigator. I made inquiries to find out who did this, who did that. And certainly, if in order to find out a situation, you conduct an inquiry, I think that would pass for investigation. Whether you are using investigation in terms of the police language or whatever, but it all comes down to the same thing. An inquiry, you want to find out why, what has happened. And I said I did so, and we couldn't zero it to any particular individual.
And you think what you did was enough?
I think in the circumstances it was enough.
How did you conduct your inquiry, sir?
Well, I asked among the youths who might have really put that vehicle on fire. And they said they don't know.
And you believe that was sufficient?
Well, I couldn't ask any further question. And certainly, in that situation, I think that was certainly sufficient until, something else suggests that, I should carry the inquiry further. And no such thing really happened.
But Mr. Dabo, you are a lawyer of God knows how many years experience. All of us would envy the amount of experience you have in terms of years. And if we put self-serving aside, it's quite obvious that such an inquiry was woefully inadequate in order to detect whosoever must have been responsible for that act.
Well, I do not agree that it was inadequate. In the first place, the question first put must have produced an answer which is not "I don't know" for you to lead on. Otherwise, you will be asking the same question and you are getting the same answer. And from my experience, as you said, that you do not really, you do not really flog a dead horse. When a person says, "I don't know," the person says, "I don't know," what else do? You're at a dead end.
But Mr. Dabo, if all investigations or inquiries are proceeded with that mindset, no inquiry would ever produce any result.
No, and my inquiry was never approached with such a mindset. And my inquiry was certainly directed at finding who did what and why the person would do that. Because of course.
Would you agree it was half-hearted?
Of course. And I had to do that because I knew that you could be facing criminal trials. And certainly, one has to get yourself well prepared for such an eventuality. So you have to get at the bottom of the facts so that when you subsequently appear in court, you are not taken unawares. There are no surprises. So I certainly, even as tense as the situation was, I had all those things at the back of my mind, and then asked the question, and that was the answer I got. And what else? I cannot get anything further than that.
You definitely could have done a whole lot more.
And indeed, to just show that how much we eschew violence, when this lady, I think I saw, when she was apprehended, I said, nobody should touch her. She must be handed to the police, and she should disclose to us who assigned them to do this. That just shows how much we cherish non-violence in political actions in this country. The lady could have been maltreated on that scene because there was no other person, but I say it will never happen.
That is indeed the kind of conduct that is expected of our political leaders, to live by the law, to do things properly, and to set a good example. And that is to be commended. But equally, that investigation, a thorough investigation, should have been organized by your party to find out what is the conduct or what was the conduct of your party members, such that even if not for this particular occasion, such that it would not happen again. Because this is absolutely key, isn't it?
It is. I don't think it is absolutely key, but it is key, but not absolutely key. And
we can agree that that is important.
And let me let the council, and let me say that certainly it was not, for me, professionally it was not possible, and humanly it was not possible for me to go beyond what I did. If I just ignored it and did not care, that would have painted a different picture. But I cared and asked who might have done this. I couldn't get an answer that it is Lasana, or it is Jalamang, or it is Badu. Do I have to then suggest that it is Babukar who did it? Do I have to accuse Babukar to say that it's Babukar who did it?
No, I suggest
why should I do that?
I would suggest that you institute an inquiry. Maybe you will have a different result.
I think I was quite satisfied with my own inquiry, and I think I really have the wherewithal to carry out a credible inquiry. And when the answer that was given showed to me that there was no other way that I could go, I ended it up there.
Let's leave it at that, Mr. Dabo. Certainly we can disagree as to what is enough or what is not enough.
Absolutely.
But the important thing here is that the principle that our political leaders should act properly and to ensure that their supporters also act properly is a point that we both agree on. And that is the most important.
In fact, that has been my mantra. That has been the gospel that has spread around, that violence should be eschewed. And I fought against it. In fact, it is against violence that we have been consistent fighting against that has led us into many troubles in this country.
Indeed.
We've never supported it, and we will never support violence.
And that is the reason why we are here.
Yeah.
And the violence or the violation of rights would be questioned and examined regardless of which quarter it comes from. In this particular instance, though, it looks like much of it came from the APRC and the Jammeh government. So we continue on the train to pursue all the things that have been done against you and your supporters. Yeah. What happened to the charge afterwards?
Well, I said a no-case submission was made and upheld on the 22nd of June, 2006, after 6 years of trial, on the 22nd of June. And I'd like to say this, one of the counsel and the team teased me and said, look, Jammeh has July 22nd. He celebrates July 22nd, so you will be celebrating June 22nd.
Indeed, indeed. Well, it looks like to the 22nd, that date, represents quite a number of things. The attack on the bridge, I think, was also 22nd. So, yes, but in between, during that 6-year period when this trial was ongoing, members of your party continue to suffer from harassment, arrests, and so forth. Would you want to talk about that? For instance, the campaign for the 2002 elections, some of the harassments that happened to some of your supporters, including Momodou Sanyang?
Yeah, 2002, in fact, I think it was 2001 presidential elections. There was this gentleman who was assigned by GRTS to my campaign team, Mr. Sanya, calling Dudu Sanya. And whilst we were on the campaign trail, he was recalled because he was reporting accurately what was happening on the ground. So he was recalled and then dismissed. Yeah. We were then assigned, I don't know who the person assigned, another reporter, and all our activities were poorly shown on the TV, and those that were transmitted on radio, the voice was done in such a way that you could hardly hear what was being said. Yeah. And indeed, it was all meant to really put us at a disadvantage. But even my own message, when I went to have it recorded, there were interruptions. Yeah? So that, and it was supposed to be, I think, a 5-minute message. But there were interruptions in such a way that, it was difficult to reconnect again. And I finally said, look, just forget it. Because we do not want us to be shown on TV as making some nonsensical statements, incoherent statements.
That was sabotage?
Yeah.
And how did you deal with that situation?
We just abandoned GRTS and focused on talking to the people on the ground.
So essentially, government was using GRTS as a tool to destabilize the activities of opposition political parties.
Well, it certainly interfered with GRTS not to convey and transmit our messages in the way that APRCs was being disseminated and transmitted.
Unfairness on the playing field?
Absolutely. Absolutely. They would say that we have given them the 5 minutes they want or they deserve, but then that 5 minutes had absolutely no use for UDP.
But during that particular campaign and in the subsequent campaign for the parliamentary elections, what violations, if any, occurred against the UDP supporters?
Well, I really cannot recall a lot of it, but certainly during that period, between the period 2000 to 2006, my supporters such as Tata Kamara from Janjambure was arrested, brought down to Banjul at NIA, and it was the same period that Singul Nyasi was also arrested, or one of his several arrests, brought to the NIA, and he was certainly mistreated. And I remember that he had to be admitted at Kololi Clinic during this period in order to get treatment. For me, as a non-medical person, it did appear to me that there was malfunctioning of his limbs. And one day I went to visit him. It appeared as if he was a toddler holding to the bed in order to work. It was quite a terrible thing that had happened to him. Several of people were arrested. In fact, I had diarized these things. When there were, in fact, in May of 2003, I was arrested, and during that period, my office, the diaries in my office were taken away, not by the state.
By who?
By Alaj Kante. Alaj Kante. He took them away to secure them, but unfortunately, they lost them. Because I had been diarizing all the events that affected the United Democratic Party.
Good. There is this point in your statement that I would wish to clear with you, and I would read it out, and you would confirm to me whether it's an accurate reflection of the evidence that you have. And that is in paragraph 34. It reads as follows. Quote, on the run-up to 2002 elections, the harassment continued unabated. Momodou Sanyang, known as Du Taylor, was arrested and severely maltreated. As a man, he was not ashamed to show some of us what they did to his genitals. He passed away. Is that true?
That is true. He was a resident of Brikama, one of our supporters from Kian West. He was arrested, taken to the NIA, and he claimed that he was electrocuted on his genitals. And he in fact showed us his genital, and it was all sore. And I think by the time he got to the hospital, it was just too late. He died.
They killed him?
He died shortly after his release from the NIA.
And would you, as a senior lawyer, under oath, say that from all you know, the NIA is responsible for his death?
I would say that the NIA is responsible for his death.
And not only him was tortured, according to you, other supporters of yours, say Alaji Karamo Fati, were also arrested.
Yes. Alaji Karamo Fati was arrested he was arrested, I believe, in 2000 because there was this tragic incident in Bansang in January, I think, of 2000. The first Friday, we had gone to Bansang so that we can go cross over to Dobo to witness the inauguration of the new mosque. And the new mosque was inaugurated then I believe on Sunday after breakfast. We just leaving to come back home to Banjul, and 5 people were in one vehicle. It was involved in a tragic accident, very fatal accident. Amongst them was the Honorable Abu Karamba Kasama, the Honorable Buba Samura, Kunda Kamara, Alaj Karamo Nyandu, and Aminata Sise. Amor Sana was also in that vehicle. He escaped dead. His son, his wife, They were in that vehicle, and Aminata's husband, Kutubu, they escaped death. So as a result of the demise of Abu Karamba Kasama and Buba Samura, by-elections were held in their constituencies. And during that by-election campaign, Alhaji Karamo Fati was arrested and taken to Janjambure, not on any court order, detained there at the will of Yahya Jammeh and his cohorts.
Was there any charge proffered against him?
No charge proffered against him.
Was he taken before any court to sanction his detention?
He was not detained by any court order. He was not, as it were, appeared in court, applied for bail, and bail refused. No. He was just picked up and taken away to Janjambure prison.
Do you know why he was picked up at all?
He was picked up because, in the first place, he was the regional chairman for UDP for North Bank region. And anyone who has any idea about the politics of North Bank region, you know that Karamo Fati is a formidable person, formidable politician. He's never swayed by intimidation, by inducement. He's never given into any of those things. And he would not support APRC. So it was a means of intimidating him and others. So he was taken to Janjambure and detained there. And sometimes this particular incident, the by-elections are sometimes difficult for me because when I talk about them, the person I see right in front of me is Kunda Kamara, one of the strongest women leaders in this country. So it's, and I don't want to, about those by-election things. I don't want to talk to them because it brings back to memory people like Kunda, and it's very difficult, very difficult for me, really, talking about things that concern Kunda today.
I'm sorry about that.
I wish she were here to see that her struggle has gained some fruits. Right.
Now let's talk about Kanyiba Kanyi. I'm sorry, Mr. Dabo, but this is...
No, it's okay. It's okay. Kanyiba Kanyi was our youth leader in Combo East. I recall, I believe it's on the 18th of October, no, 18th of September, that he was arrested from
Of which year?
2006, when he was arrested and taken to the NIA. I pursued the matter with the relevant government departments, particularly the Minister of Interior.
Let's first talk about how he came to be arrested and who were the players and how things evolved.
Well, the information I had was that he had gone to some, because he used to work for CCF. So he had gone to some to collect the key from a colleague of his who lives in Som, in fact, who is said to be the brother of the chief of Combo East.
Who at the time?
Basiru, I think it's Basiru Jaju or so.
Basiru Jaju, former chief of Som.
Yeah, former chief of Combo East. And when he went to their compound, Basir Jari's compound, he found what appeared to be a meeting. The chief and the National Assembly member for Kombo East then. And they felt that maybe he had come to spy on them.
Why would they think so? Was this guy a well-known member of the UDP?
Well, yes, because this was an APRC meeting.
Yes, but was Kanyiba a well-known member of the UDP?
Very well-known member of UDP in Kombo East. He was our youth leader. Very prominent person, very well-known. So I guess they felt that, he must have gone to spy on them, and a report was made to the Interior Minister then. And
who was he at the time?
Mr. Babukar Jatta. And this is confirmed by Mr. Babukar Jatta himself, that a report was made to him. And Mr. Kanyiba Kanyi's arrest was ordered.
By who?
Well, I believe by Mr. Jatta.
How did you come to form that belief?
Well, these were statements. In fact, I'll bring the documentation. I'll surrender to you the documentation of, in fact, of minutes of the inter-party committee meeting at which these things were disclosed. Because Mr. Jatta expressed his disappointment that he was in Geneva and read from the newspapers, that Kanyiba was still in detention, was still not released. By the NIA, he expressed his disappointment at that.
Did he, during that meeting, confirm that he had ordered the arrest of Kanyiba?
Oh, yes.
I don't quite get that answer.
Yes, he did.
He did?
He did.
But he was subsequently disappointed that Kanyiba was not released.
Yeah, and he had said that he should be released. He was not released. Yeah. Guess maybe a more superior order had been given.
That's speculation, isn't it?
That it is speculation. It's quite a possible. Otherwise, if the Minister of Interior, who says arrest, you arrest, and he says release, you refuse to release, the person must be acting some orders that are probably more superior to that of Mr. Jatta. It need not be the president. It could be some other person within their APRC hierarchy, even photographers. I know of photographers who have more authority than ministers under the APRC government.
That is strange, but we would, come to that important point.
Oh yes. So when we learned of his arrest, I made contacts in various government agencies, Minister of Interior, the police, NIA, and there was and he couldn't be found. And a week after that, I think 23rd September, Rambo, Usman Jatta, was also arrested. And we tried to locate them. We couldn't. So I had to file a habeas corpus application in the court.
Before we judge?
Before Justice Monahan.
Of the ICC?
Yes, I believe, yes. Yes.
Formally, she finished her term. Yes.
She finished, yes. Justice Monahan, I filed the habeas corpus application before her. And the state's response was that she's not in our custody. We don't have them.
They say whether they had him at any point in time.
They said they've never had him. That has always been the practice of the NIA. They will tell you, they would arrest an individual and tell you that he's not here. We don't have him. That has been their practice all along. And with this habeas corpus...
Can you give us some examples? Just to strengthen this.
In fact, when I talked about Tata Kamara and Singul Nyasi,
yes.
It was Tata Kamara, once he came and told us that Singul Nyasi at the NIA, when they had actually denied that they have him in their custody.
That's an important point.
Yeah. That is their, if we call it that, their trademark. You know,
modus operandi.
Modus operandi. Arrest somebody, we don't know, we don't have in our custody.
So it means that orders of the court to produce a body under a habeas corpus application is just treated with contempt.
It is treated with the utmost contempt and disdain, with the utmost disrespect.
Those are very strong words.
They are very strong words, and I want to say that, unfortunately, in this very callous way of treating people, they are aided by lawyers in doing so, because it is lawyers who settle these false affidavits for them.
We would come to that again, because we would have a hearing on the conduct of the Ministry of Justice in helping cement a dictatorship.
Yes.
And you promised to come and testify and provide evidence on this particular issue.
Absolutely. Absolutely, yes.
We would remember to call you on that.
I will. I'll be too willing to do that. And Justice Manahan dealt with all the competing arguments and made an order for their unconditional, immediate and unconditional release. And the state filed an appeal against the order. And they never pursued their appeal. And when we went back to Justice Manahan, because I said that they should be cited for contempt, went back to Justice Manahan, filed it in, all the documents, and they came out again with their denials. And because Honorable Ahmad Ba had attended this inter-party committee meeting, at which Babkar Jatta did say that he in fact ordered the arrest of Mr. Kanyiba Kanyi, and also ordered for his release, but nothing was done, and he was surprised about that. He got Ahmad Ba, Honorable Ahmad Ba, to depose to an affidavit, and we exhibited to the affidavit the minutes of the meeting. That meeting was attended, I think, by Mr. Grant from the National Democratic Institute in an observer status. And again, even with that document, the state's lawyers continued to settle false affidavits. And in fact, even before filing that document, I called counsel, and before Justice Monahan, I said, look, we are professional people. Yeah? I am a lawyer, and I am also leader of a political party. But as leader of a political party, I have certain considerations. There are certain issues I don't want to put in the public gaze because it's not going to tell well on the government of this country, and it is my government. I would want you to really reconsider your position and withdraw the affidavit, even though fiscally you cannot withdraw it, but you can tell the judge that you are not going to rely on that affidavit. He persisted that he would, that's their position, and that they do not have them in their custody. I filed the document, and Justice Monaghan ended up saying, look, it is not possible for this gentleman to disappear from the surface of the earth. It's not possible. You have to produce him, you have him. But the state really refused to release him, and up to today, we do not know where Kanyiba Kanyi is. And in fact, when Rambo, when I think the Fourier reporter and someone from Amnesty International bumped into Rambo, Usman Jatta, in Sarangai, down border, one of the border villages in URR, when he bumped into him, we filed another affidavit, because the NIA was denying, we filed another affidavit to say that, look, this gentleman was one of the arrestees on whose behalf this habeas corpus application was filed. The state continued to lie to say that they do not have them in their custody. Here he is, found in a police custody. In fact, the NIA had taken him there and dumped him there. We knew he was previously in Fatoto, because our indomitable Solo Sandeng was following Rambo from one police station to the other until he was found at
Sarangai.
Fatoto, before he was taken to Sarangai. And he had gone there to do exactly what we did for Kemeseng, while in custody to sign his nomination papers. But they wouldn't allow it. You saw him at Fatoto because Solo Sandeng saw him at Fatoto. He was removed from Fatoto and taken to Sarangai, a more remote area. And when we filed another affidavit, still the state continued to say that they do not have Kanyiba Kanyi in their custody. And for me, it's not a matter of surprise that counsel who was doing this for the government subsequently became the Chief Justice of this country.
That would be?
Fakbele.
And why do you think he
to compensate him for entrenching dictatorship in this country?
He was
for misusing the legal process and entrenching dictatorship in this country. Is to compensate him. And that is why he was appointed president of the Court of Appeal when there were his seniors in the Court of Appeal. President was appointed president.
Did the Bar Association protest this?
The Bar Association certainly did not protest. And even when he was appointed Chief Justice, there were some rumblings. Because the Constitution provides that when a vacancy occurs in the office of the Chief Justice, the most senior judge of the Supreme Court should be appointed Chief Justice.
His appointment was illegal.
He should be appointed Chief Justice. In fact, Justice Raymond Sok, who was then acting Chief Justice, should have been appointed Chief Justice of the Gambia.
So the appointment was contrary to the provisions
Absolutely.
Of seniority?
Absolutely. It was contrary to the provisions of the Constitution. And because with him as Chief Justice, because we saw how some of the rulings in the Supreme Court became, how rulings, when he was president of the Court of Appeal, how rulings in the Court of Appeal were being made. We know how the law job is done.
The dictatorship was perfected.
The dictatorship was perfected by being given a judicial stamp of approval.
Kanyiba Kanyi was never seen again since.
He's never seen since again. He's left a pregnant wife. He left a pregnant wife. And the sad thing about it is that that child has never had the touch of a father. Some of us caress our children, but this poor chap has never had that opportunity. All because he is UDP, or he was UDP, and he stood for UDP. He stood against dictatorship. In fact, not that he was doing anything to favor UDP. Whatever he was doing was to support the Gambians, was to ensure that the rule of law prevails in this country, that there's no lip service to democracy. That is what he stood for. His son can only see his father's image in his pictures.
He's never been seen since. We can presume him dead.
He's never been seen since, and we do not know where he has been buried.
We can presume him dead.
Of course, I did say that after the 7th year of his disappearance, I did say that we hold the government of the Gambia accountable for his death, because the law presumes that when a person is absent for a period of 7 years, unheard of, he is presumed dead. And we presume that he died in the hands of the government of the Gambia, and that the government of the Gambia's agents killed him. By whatever means, I don't know.
we would investigate that particular issue. For now, it suffices to put it on the record that this person has been disappeared in the hands of government authorities. Now, let's proceed with the other arrests that took place after this. Tell us about the Madiana 14.
Well, after the 2011 elections, general elections, the youth wing of the party said that there should be more concentration in the West Coast region. Started building chapters in the various villages, organizing the party at the grassroots level. But before Madiana, again, Solo Sanden had organized people of built a strong chapter there, and had a town hall meeting with them. And at this town hall meeting, he invited me to address the members of the new committee. And when that meeting ended, that very evening, he was arrested and prosecuted in Brikama for holding a meeting without the permit. But he had taken the precaution to go to the local police station and ask for a permit. And he was given one. Even though we do not believe that for a town hall meeting, we do not believe that you needed to have a permit for that. Because there was no public address system being used.
That's the law.
Yeah, no public address system being used.
You have to use a public address system.
But then he took the extra precaution of really applying for a permit. What happened is that during the trial, so that the question
within the production of the permit effectively terminate the trial. Why was it necessary to question Solo Sandeng as to what was discussed during the trial?
Of course, the production of the permit should have been enough. But the police themselves did not agree among themselves. Because some felt that, look, this permit ought to have been issued by the Inspector General of Police, not at the local level. And others said, look, Inspector General of Police or what is not Solo Sandeng's business. Solo Sandeng has a permit from the police and he doesn't care whether it is Inspector General of Police that issued it or a sergeant at the police station. So, and I know then there was a lot of politics in the police. There was a lot of politics in the police. Please, how many Inspector Generals of Police have we lost in this country?
How many?
Well, we'll start counting. It's difficult for me to count.
More than attorneys general?
They're competing. So, during the course of the trial, the questions that the police were putting forward was more about me. I think it was thought that, through evidence that will come before the court, they'll be able to put me before the court for trial again and hopefully convict me. But the key witness, really, one Mr. Jaite said, well, Mr. Dabo came to the place, but he did not hear Mr. Dabo say anything, and honestly, that was what I didn't say anything. The Kenyans were there performing, took my 2 grandchildren with me so that they can, because they had just come from the United States, so that they could see culture. But at the home of the Mandinkas. See how culture is there. That's why I took them with me. But I said that I had gone there for a rally. And I thought it would be too unthinkable of me to take my grandchildren to a political rally, knowing that at a political rally anything can happen. I cannot expose my grandchildren to that. But the magistrate, on a no-case submission, discharged Law Sandeng. Then came Madiana 14. 14 of them went to Madiana to really penetrate the APRC fortress, and they did penetrate it. They were arrested, and again charged for unlawful assembly, and a host of other charges, sometimes with due respect to the police. So when they don't have a case, they fish and see, let us try this, maybe that will stick. Let's try it so that hopefully that will stick. So
they plug it from the air.
Yes, so really about 3 or 4 counts against them. And again, at a no-case submission, they were acquitted and discharged. But before then, they were kept in custody.
For how long?
For a whole week. For a whole week. Before they appeared in court and released on court bail. So the APRC had used unjustifiably the legal process to harass us, had used the security outfit to harass us, had used administrative machinery to harass us. And one spectacular way they did it was in the case of my brother-in-law, who was working for Gamtel.
Who was he?
Lassana Jobate.
Tell us what happened to him.
He was dismissed because he appears at our rallies. And it will not be unnatural for my brother-in-law to attend my political rallies.
Was he a state official?
He was an employee of GRTS.
Was he a civil servant?
He was an employee of a body corporate, Gambia Radio and Television Services.
He was a public servant.
He was a public servant, but not a civil servant.
And within the rules of within the rules of overt participation in party politics, wouldn't that apply to public servants? That applies to public servants who really take on the political platform. But to go and listen, to be convinced whether you should really vote, what way you should vote or not, that is not prohibited. That is your testimony? That is my testimony. Thank you so much, Mr. Dabo, for answering my questions. Perhaps before I just yield the floor to the commissioners to ask questions, there is one important point you raised, which I think is important for the Commission to hear, which is the de facto powers that people who are associated with the government had, which transcended or were even superior to their de jure powers. You gave an example of a photographer who may be more powerful than a minister. I think this is an important point. Yes, and I wouldn't be embarrassed to mention a name. Please go ahead. There is a Mr. Moduba. I know he was a junior photographer in the film unit. In where? In the film unit. That metamorphs to the television, to the television unit of GRTS. He was a junior photographer there. Yeah? And he subsequently became photographer in State House. And these were the people who were wielding influence, who could get people sacked, who could get people employed. And that is how bad the way government operated in this country, that's how bad it was.
people who have absolutely no idea as to how to run governments, but yet they make people take decisions.
In 2 minutes, describe the Jammeh government to us and its human rights record during these past 22 years in which Jammeh was in power.
Well, Jammeh's government really, in my view, was known to be the worst government on the globe of this earth, on the face of this earth. Having regard to the size, both physical and population size of this country, the way that the Jammeh government treated we the citizens of this Gambia has never been done in another country. In other countries, people do have the courage to go out and protest. We see in other parts of the world where people are protesting against the wrong governance of their governments. But here, we were so intimidated. Each and every one of us were cowed to the extent that Jammeh had a free field to do whatever he willed. And he had willing partners, people who were supporting him in it, people who, actually praised him for doing these things. That those of us who did not support him, we were the bad citizens. And this included even the journalists, that we were the bad citizens, and people were supporting that. Religious leaders extolled what he was doing. So, it was really a government that was only Jammeh. It was a government that was only Jammeh, and no other person really could say anything contrary to what he believes or what he wants. And he ran this country in a way that when he tells you jump, you ask him how high. That is how he was running the country. You know? The judiciary brought the judiciary to disrepute. And that is where I am much ashamed of, because that's the area I love much. That's the constituent that I thought would really put the dictator in his right place. Because after 1996, we had have a constitution in place, which before it was truncated, it's probably a good working document. But the judiciary never gave life to the skeleton that is in that constitution. Instead, they applied the constitution in ways that me as a lawyer, I feel embarrassed because I see that maybe in the gallery, there are prominent lawyers sitting in the gallery there, seeing how our judges are behaving, hearing the utterances of our judges. When they go, what will they say about the legal profession in the Gambia? I feel embarrassed. When the Constitution says that you cannot be detained for more than 72 hours, a judge says that, look, but the man was arrested on Friday, so 72 hours you cannot count it until Monday.
Saturday and Sunday would not count.
Would not be, as if the clock doesn't tick, as the minute doesn't tick within those days. This was how much damage was done to the credibility of our judiciary. Not to talk of the civil service.
We would hold a hearing on how we, as a people, created a dictatorship. So these words would, or these ideas would be very relevant to such a hearing. And on that too, if you have the time, you would be invited to participate, or you can send in a paper. Yes, because if we are to avoid a dictatorship happening again in this country, we have to be able to dissect what was it that we did which created a dictatorship so that we can avoid it for the future. Thank you so much, Mr. Dabo, for answering my questions. Mr. Chair,
anyway,
witnesses,
I undertake to bring you the certified true copy of the habeas corpus applications and the ruling of Justice Monahan also.
That would be helpful.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much, Counsel. You used to be the one who was always guilty of preempting you, but I think this time around you preempted us with your question to the witness about Jammeh's human rights record. That I thought would have been part of his concluding remarks, and if it is still all right, we should ask him to give a general concluding remarks on today's testimony. Mr. Dabo, thank you so much for taking time to come. You really have demonstrated great resilience, both physically and intellectually, in your testimony. Notwithstanding the threats, harassment, and intimidation, you soldiered on all these years. That's commendable. But again, thank you so much for taking the time to come and testify, and we will see you at least 2 more times. Commissioners, if you have any questions, please go ahead. Commissioner Carr, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a couple of questions that are related to, firstly, your family, because the Commission is interested in what happened to, or how your victimization affected your family. And in your testimony, that didn't come up. So I'd be interested to know how your victimization really affected your family.
Well, see, I had prepared my family to live up with the consequences of whatever happens to me. I knew I was getting into an enterprise that was dangerous in the Gambian circumstance. And I knew that in the midst of my family, while chatting with them, I could be picked up and taken away to unknown places. I knew that I was exposing myself to situations where I could lose my life. In fact, the ambush at Chamway was really intended to make sure that I do not continue my political activity. I would be a dead man. I had prepared them for that. And they are my Ajamai and Ajasali, they are very strong women. They have, through all my tribulations, stood out there, very supportive. My brothers, my sisters, those abroad and those in the Gambia, the large extended family have all been by me, because they all knew that I have taken a certain course which could lead me into trouble, and they are prepared to live with it. Even my children, the youngest, my first arrest, the youngest was only 2 years old, Navisatu. But since then, I have made her understand that in the Gambia, this is the life of a politician. And she lives with it. And that is why during my trials, she never bothered, or none of them ever bothered, to come to court during my murder trial. And they stayed at home, doing what they should do. Ajamaya would once in a while go on into the provinces, talk to women's group there. And Ajasali would do the same thing in the Greater Banjul area here. So as far as my family is concerned, they are all prepared. And the only thing that I think I bring that later on in my evidence when we deal with the Solo Sanden case is that I had failed in preparing myself in the event of anything happening to my family. I had failed in doing that. And I'm still living with the consequences of that. It's still impacting on me, and I hope that with time, I'll be able to recover from that shock in 2006, and I've still lived with that shock, because I had not prepared myself for that. But my family, they know that, look, tomorrow, he could be in jail. Yeah. So they are not bothered.
The second question is in relation to how young people in your party were also victimized, because you mentioned Mr. Kanye. I'm sure there are other cases. Mr. Sandeng, we will come to that later. But I want to know the general picture of how young people in the party were victimized.
Well, really, those who were actively involved in our politics, they never sought any government employment. They never sought any government contract, because being associated with UDP is being an opponent to Yahya Jammeh. And no one who is known to be an opponent to Yahya Jammeh should really benefit from government employment or in government contract or be employed by any of the public corporations. And that was the reason why my brother-in-law was dismissed. In fact, he was going with the president on his tour. When he entered the ferry, the president was at the Captain Bridge, and he pointed at him, said he should go out of the ferry. So he was discharged from the ferry. My family members would not get jobs anywhere. But again, that always gave me the elan and the impetus to push that a system that allows for such a thing, that people are not denied jobs because they do not deserve it, because they do not have the merit. Just because they're associated with a political party, it should not be a thing that we want to encourage, and we are pushing against that, and we'll continue to push against that, because that is why you have never again. That these sort of things should never happen in the Gambia. You are the membership of a party that is opposed to the government, to the ruling party, should not be a reason for you to be victimized in any way, whether in terms of job opportunities, in terms of other opportunities, in scholarships and so forth. It should never happen. We are Gambians, and every Gambian has a right to his political belief. And that right, we must make sure that prevails. And if it have to be never again, then those violations of human rights that took place in Jammeh's time, ways and means of entrenching oneself in power, should be eschewed. And we'll continue to fight against any such tendencies from whatever quarter in this country.
My final question is, you mentioned the Never Again campaign, and within the commission, and this is a responsibility that's within the youth committee of the commission. We have, one of the things we target to do is to conscientize young people to take more proactive role in the politics of this country. I'd like to hear your suggestions on that. It would be helpful in our campaign. Thank you.
Well, certainly, never again. I have repeated it several times. In fact, you have given me some tool, never again. And I use it in various contexts, that we should not allow the economy of this country to be destroyed by greed. That it is our responsibility of Gambians to ensure that what is in the best economic interest of this country, we pursue that. That is in the best interest of Gambians to see to it that we do not deify any person because deification of individuals has led to what obtained in the past 22 years. So never again. And indeed, I personally am talking to the younger people, and I'm talking to the women group, because at the end of the day, when we go on electioneering, we go out and talk to these women, talk to these young people, and ask them to vote for us on promises that are hardly kept. So I address them and I encourage them to come into politics. After all, when the mantle of political leadership, for me, is not consigned to a particular age group. That persons of all ages who are mature, I think, should really be playing a leading role. And I'm happy to say that got a lot of young people in my party who I can say can take up the leadership of the United Democratic Party and then have elderly people by them giving them advice so that they could temper down their exuberance. And certainly, Never Again campaign, we are in it with you, and we'll definitely propagate the idea so that we do not have a TRRC again in this country.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davo. Commissioner Kinte, the floor.
Hello, Assalamu alaikum, Honorable Davo. Definitely the plight of and the ordeals of UDP and the Gambian people in general has been traumatic. Recalling them sometimes can be very emotional, we agree. But this were a result of the opportunity, the open space given to Jammeh and his team to be entrenched. I don't think I call it entrenching themselves, aiding them to be entrenched, whether willingly or unwillingly, consciously or unconsciously. We all, in one way or the other, contributed in entrenching, helping Jammeh to entrench in power. There are indicators. You told us as early as 1996 that you had enough evidence and conviction that your defeat was robbed of you. Your victory was stolen away from you. And you gave some points that could be clue or indicators. What I thought at that earlier moment would have been you coming together with your executive, mobilizing support from all other opposition and activists, and go out popularly, not only within political rallies and so on, but on the international arena and very loudly denouncing the robbery. At that earlier stage, while some people were already skeptical about the junta and the fact that they have not been strong enough yet, they have not been deep-rooted, confronted with a popular international denouncement could have impacted. That's one observation I have. 1 year later, or in fact before preceding 96, the murder of Koro Sise. We congratulate you for condemning it in a political rally and so on. But it would have been more effective if you had mobilized adequate activism, popular denouncement, and advocacy would have yielded some result. Yes, that's a weakness and so on. The third point is our political parties need to be revisited for tangible reformations. Political parties should be do I call it pseudo or prototype governments or governments in the waiting? Since they should be governments in the waiting, especially when they are strong enough, like the UDP in particular. And now that's a second party, one may put pointer on GDC. Such parties should have structures that will imitate all the government, the supposed or proposed government functions. Like you knew you needed security, whether government gave it to you or not, you provided security for yourself during your tour. I think it's in the same way that you should have all the structures in place to have enabled you to make enough adequate inquiry on the offenses that not only that the UDP committed, but even the APRC committed. Like if the opposition had tools, they have the structures. If they had gone in depth, they could have revealed certain things on Koro's case that would have compelled the government to move one more or two more steps than they did.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. It's after 4 p.m. I'm sure Mr. Kinte would ask his question. Thank you.
Well, okay, but that's the points I have. I'm just saying these are not necessarily questions. They are observations. I think sometimes it's not only questions. We can put up some input, and that will prick some this thing. That's I said in my opinion, if we had such a structure in our opposition systems, yeah, that would have deterred Yaya and his team a lot, just as it would have the individual, all the individuals. A classic example is when we all came together in a coalition, we defeated him. When someone volunteered and went out, of course we had, it was fatal, someone lost life. But that mobilized international attention until Yaya is out. That's my point.
Well, okay. I appreciate the observation. Maybe if I may take it in ascending order. I mean, structures. Well, when you really say structures that would look as government, you know, maybe these are things that is not open to the public, because the inner workings of political parties, unless you are a member of the executive or a member of the party, a prominent member of the party, you would hardly know the inner workings of a party. But let me say that since 1997, we had put in place a system that we served as if we had a shadow cabinet, a shadow government. That is why in those days, our National Assembly members would always have meetings with people I would call advisors in various fields, in agriculture, in education, in health, name it, and get them prepared for National Assembly and get them ask the relevant questions to government. So we had that, and we still have it. And in fact, even some of them are given some specific designations within our party hierarchy, like Secretary for External Matters, External Affairs. And we had our beloved brother, Femi Peters. So he was conducting relations with the diplomatic community. Yeah. Had somebody responsible for legal affairs, counterpart of the Attorney General.
With all due respect, sir, allow me to intervene at this stage. The purpose of calling Mr. Dabo here is not to interrogate him as to how his party is organized. This is about victimizations that he and members of his party has suffered. This is about violations of human rights that have occurred in the country in the past 20-something years. I am sure Mr. Dabo is just reacting to what's been put on the table. But I think it is unfair on our part, really, to want to even hear how his party is organized. This is not about the UDP. The TRRC is partisan. Non-partisan, I meant to say. And I re-echo that it's non-partisan. The TRRC is to find out the violations that have occurred in this country. Thank you, Mr. Dabo, for being so gracious to answer the questions prompted by the Commissioner. But I am sure if he is more interested in hearing more about how the UDP is organized, perhaps that can be done during private consultations. But for the purposes of our hearing, I think it is sufficient that we leave the matter at violations of rights that Mr. Dabo and members of the UDP or even any other civilian in Gambia has suffered during these past 22 years. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for raising that point of order, Council. But can the witness just finish his point, and we would move on to the next round of questions. Do you have anything more to add on to the observations?
No, just giving examples. I don't want to add anymore.
That's great. Thank you. Imam C, you have the floor.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Amna kaddu bula Edward Singate tonton. Bi ngeen demee foofu yéen kilifa yi bi ngeen demee foofu waxtaane ak ñoom ci affaire nguur bi ba mu ne leen ñoom amuñu bot duñ dee gis dara.
When you went there and they told you that they were blind, they could not see.
Yéen ay gis ñoom duñ gis dara.
That you are the ones that would see, they could not see.
Kaddu boobu wone na ne ñoom amuñu luñ ragal amuñu luñ ruus.
That statement showed that there was nothing they feared, there was nothing that they were embarrassed of.
Ndax yéen itam amoon ngeen tontu bu nga leen tontu woon.
At that time, did you have any response for them?
ñaareelu laajteel bi mooy biñ la tiyee ci weeru koor bi juróom ñaari fan.
The second question is when you were arrested during the month of Ramadan for 20 days.
Mbaar indi lu la jafe-jafe ci woor bi.
Whether that did not bring you any inconvenience as far as the fasting was concerned?
Ak ci dog bi.
And the breaking of the fast.
Jërëjëf Imam.
Thank you, Imam.
Edward Singate nag kàdduwam boobu bi mu waxoon noonu ñun ni ñu ko gisee woon mooy.
The statement that Edward made, the way we saw it was.
ñun nang leen ñu dimbale parce que ñun xaleel lañu gisuñ.
It meant that help us. We are
so ngeen dimbale ñu.
We cannot see, so we want you to help us.
ndax foo xam ne ñu ngi bugg a def loo xam ne àndut ak yoon.
So that
ngeen eddañu.
Where we went wrong, you could advise us.
noonu laa ko gisee woon.
That was how I saw it.
te foog na ñeneen itam ñu bokkoon ci délégation bi ñoom yëpp noonu lañ ko gisee woon.
And I think the others also that were part of the delegation, that was how they saw it.
li leen tontu nag mooy ne ndimbal boo xam ne dafa war a nekk ci pour njëriñu réew mi ñun ba association bi nañ ko def.
Our response was that whatever assistance we could give them for the good of the country, the bar association would do so.
buñ ma téye woon ci weeru koor bi nag loolu nag jafe-jafe tëddukaay rek la amoon waaye gannaaw loolu awma benn jafe-jafe.
When I was arrested during the month of Ramadan, the only difficulty I had was my place where I lie down.
Or naa ni ma waree or te maa ngi doon am ndogu ni ma ko waree amee.
I fasted as I should, and I broke my fast as I should as well.
Wow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dabo. Imam Jallo, you have the floor.
Raju Seinu, this is a question dealing with your party members who have gone missing with time. What efforts are you taking to ensure that you look into the possibility of knowing their whereabouts or what has happened to them? Do you have any plans to do that? Thank you.
Well, we would hope that the TRRC would aid us in that. Get the NIA, doing investigations. I had myself visited the prisons, visited the NIA, in fact, taken to cells in the NIA. Cells were open ajar, say, look, are they here? Taken to mile 2, maximum security, all areas in the maximum security, cells opened, asked me whether my Kanyaba Kanyi was in any of those cells. But my immediate reaction was that, look, you could have removed him from these cells so that my search for them would be futile. I will not see them. When really, the days that he was just arrested, why did you not bring me to your cells so that I search for him there? You continue denying. But at this time, bringing me here to the cells is of no use. I accepted the invitation to do so because I wanted to see the conditions in those detention centers, in NIA and in the Mile 2 prisons. I wanted to see in what conditions they were before I became a guest at Mile 2.
Thank you very much, Mr. Davo, for that. Would you have any concluding remarks? Oh, sorry. Oh, Bishop, my apologies. Okay, oops, we do have a few questions. Go ahead, Bishop, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Honorable Mr. Davo, as a politician of many years of standing, and as you witness that the judiciary was manipulated by the government, what is your take on the separation of powers, namely the three arms of government?
Well, I think it's a healthy governance system, but then it can be of value only if separation of powers is not theoretical. If the judiciary can be manipulated, then the constitutional provision providing for separation of powers is absolutely of no significance. Only of significance if, in its practical implementation, you do have separation of powers. And in the Gambian context, I've always thought that the judiciary is the most powerful of all the organs of government. Under the constitution of the Gambia, is the most powerful. It is the judiciary that can strike down legislations passed by the National Assembly and say that not in conformity with the constitution. It is the judiciary that can set aside executive orders. But the legislature cannot pass any law to nullify any judgment, any decision of the judiciary. Nor can the executive do the same thing. It is the most potent of our organs, but yet it turned out to be the most malleable of all. Because when, and I'm saying this, when it comes to matters between the state and the citizens, between private individuals, contracts to buy land and so forth and so on, it's straightforward. It is when it comes to matters between government and the citizens that the judiciary has been found very wanting. And we hope that the next constitution will not only make sure that this principle of separation of power is maintained, but will also work out guidelines that will make them remain, separate and independent. And that is to say, you must have the men of character. You must have men of integrity. No institution is strong when the leadership of the institution is weak. You must have them, strong people who will look at the president and say, I'm not going to do this. That is what will make the institutions strong, and their constitutionalization becomes beneficial to the society. So it's just not having the separation of power, but have strong men of character, strong men and women of character. There are some judges that Gambian judges I'm very, very proud of. I know of a judge who banged the jaw on a chief judge and said, I'm not going to do this. It's not right. And I've also seen where the chief justice picks a file and says, oh, Justice so-and-so, come, there's this file here. And you know that, what is going to happen. So that you need men of character. You need a chief justice that will not be looking into the eyes of any president. And we believe that with the crop of Supreme Court judges we have, inshallah, the judiciary would be the robust judiciary that we want in this country. But then, after them, we don't know. So there must always be this breed of strong men of strong character who will head our institutions. The ombudsman must have people of strong character that will lead them. The Independent Electoral Commission, even the legislature, National Assembly. So really, the separation of powers really is not what is written in the Constitution that actualizes the separation of powers. It is those who implement the provisions of the Constitution that actualize the separation of powers.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anthony Jones. You have the floor.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Honorable Dabo, for sharing your testimony with the Commission. From your narration to the Commission, or from your testimony, Muslim victimization during the period under review was as a result of being an opposition member and holding divergent views. So in essence, in short, it was a way of suppressing your voice and that of your party members as well as the party associates. Given what you've been through on your ordeal, what recommendations would you make to be able to ensure that there's a level playing field for all political parties, where the freedom of speech, assembly, association would be created for space for them to be able to exist in this country?
Well, what I would say is that, all those who are really seeking political power in this country should always have that at the back of their minds, never again. If we do that, no one will be suppressed in this country. Because things have happened, people want to retain themselves in power at all cost, by all means. You can frame up charges, trump up charges against people, can make people disappear. You can force people into exile. Never again. If we really entrench that as part of our culture, then no political party will be suppressed in this country for holding views that are contrary to what the ruling party holds. So never again, I think, should be what we should all commit ourselves to, whoever aspires for political position in this country. And in fact, you should make sure that you preach that as your sermon, your Friday sermon and your Sunday sermon to the Gambian people. And when the Gambian people come to embrace never again, it will never happen. Because any attempt by Usainu Dabo to behave in a manner that Yahya Jammeh did, the Gambian population will not allow it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Vice President. If you have any concluding remarks to make, you can do so, or if you think that what you have done a few minutes ago is all part of a concluding set of remarks.
Well, with the programs highlighted by lead counsel, maybe my concluding remarks, I should leave it until when I come to for the last lap of my appearance, then I can make my concluding remark, which would cover this session, and if there's any other session in between and the last session. If the chairman permits that, and please never call me vice president. I was vice president.
Oh, my apologies. Yes, there are areas where once vice president, once president, I always address even GA presidents as Mr. President, Mr. President, Mr. Vice President, Mr. Senator, Honorable Senator. So you're no longer vice president, but you were vice president for us today, the chair. But if council, do we have witnesses lined up for tomorrow before we conclude our proceedings for the day?
Yes, we do, Mr. Chairman. And of course, I endorse Mr. Dabo's position on the issue of the concluding remarks. I think it would help greatly if we have it all saved for the last session in which he would appear before us. And I think that would make a lot of sense. He would definitely on that occasion have a lot to say, because we would have put together a lot of topics on which he could address us. So thank you very much for also suggesting that approach. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. The only disadvantage with that one is that there are certain remarks that require response today, and if you waited until the end of his third appearance, they may not be appropriate. And this is the disclosure about Nganzinde Nkilo that he had gone through. He needs to be punished for that. But you can't leave that all.
I think lead counsel will protect me here.
Yes, indeed.
Very much so. Very much so.
But again, Mr. Dabo, Mr. Vice President, thank you very much for taking time and coming to share with us the one of the main objectives of this commission, to create an impartial historical record of violations of human rights from 1994 to 2017, in order to create, to promote healing and the reconciliation and avoid impunity and a few others. That's the main objective, one of the main objectives of this commission. And you have come out here today, said earlier on in my opening remarks about you, that after traveling a very long distance from the Middle East to come here and stay with us the entire day, you are not showing any weakness physically. So that's quite a remarkable thing. But thank you again very much for coming to assist us in the work that the National Assembly is giving us. If there are no other comments, we would meet you again tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.